So let us discuss about the secure synopsis of 14th of April 2021. So far we have done almost 13 so far. 13th April was the last one. So today we'll be doing starting from 14th of April 2021. So let's get started. It's General Studies 1. The topic is under this is Modern Indian History from about the middle of the 18th century until the present. Significant events will be covered and personalities and issues. So 14th of April was Ambedkar's birthday. So let us have a look at a question on Ambedkar. Ambedkar's vision of nationalism and his philosophy of Bahujan Hitaya, Bahujan Sukhaya, and his belief in equality and justice is relevant today and will remain so in the future. Comment. So the question here is about Ambedkar and his vision of nationalism and his philosophy of Bahujan people. And let us have a look at the answer to this question. Baba Saheb Ambedkar was a visionary who fought for justice and equality of the downtrodden in India. He saw the numerous class and caste separation as a hindrance to unity and even said that India cannot be called a nation until and unless the people abolish the caste system and untouchability. He has a unique vision of nationalism which reflects in the Constitution of India. Let us have a look at the Ambedkar's vision of nationalism. He described nationality as consciousness of kind, awareness of the existence of that tie of kinship, as this is how people come close to each other and develop a sense of fraternity. In this, the idea of narrowness is the biggest obstacle. So here, Ambedkar says that we should not have narrowness in our mindset, which means we should not just think about our own religion, and we should think about India as people of different religion and different caste, and not just stick on to people who are Hindu or Muslims. He clearly said that he wanted all the people of India to consider themselves as Indian and only Indian and nothing else. He said there is no distinction among individuals irrespective of their caste and religion. There should be harmony among all of us. That is why our nation is a classic example of unity in diversity. Hence, preamble of the Constitution lays stress on equality and fraternity among citizens. Any nation is formed by coming together of its traditions, cultures, religions, and languages. Therefore, nationalism has no place for parochialism. Ambedkar also explained the vision about India in a wider perspective, giving importance to the land, its society, and best traditions for nation building. He stressed that nation is not a physical entity. It is the result of continuous efforts, sacrifice, and patriotism. So, always nation is always in the making and it is never made. Ambedkar's sense of equality and justice. Ambedkar took three words from the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. These words, included in the core of the Constitution, also deeply influenced his political and social philosophy. That is why the fundamental rights provided by the Constitution enshrine the right to equality through Articles 14 to 18, and the right to freedom through Articles 19 to 22, and the right against exploitation, that is Articles 23 and 24. Ambedkar was also a pioneer in his thinking on women's education and jobs. He believed that the progress of a community ought to be measured by the degree of progress which women had achieved. He was probably the first scholar who tried to understand the position of women in the caste structure that led him to advocate for rights and empowerment of women. Ambedkar's dream for India was that equality should be established at all levels in the society. That is why he constantly emphasized on making society classless. It is intellectual poverty to associate him only with a particular class or caste. He belonged to all. If we go into the totality of Ambedkar's thoughts, we will find the seeds of equality, unity, and integrity. His philosophy of Bahujan Hitaya, Bahujan Sukhaya, and his belief in equality and justice is relevant today and will remain so in the future. So, whenever you get a question on Ambedkar, you can actually mention articles and what he took from the French Revolution, that is liberty, equality, and fraternity, and also his Bahujan Hitaya and Bahujan Sukhaya kind of a belief. Let's conclude the answer. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's idea of India is relevant even today and must be upheld more than ever. Today, India is facing many socio-economic challenges such as casteism, communalism, separatism, gender inequality. We need to find the Ambedkar's spirit within his wish so that we can pull ourselves from these challenges. General Studies 2. Under this, the topic is bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. Peace with Pakistan is not just a bilateral matter but is essential for India to transform South Asia. Do you agree? Analyze. So, this is with respect to India and Pakistan and how India and Pakistan's friendship or bilateral issues can be resolved and how it can be helped in transforming the South Asia. In February, the Director Generals of Military Operations of India and Pakistan notified that they agree to strictly observe all agreements between the two countries. This comes after 2 years of Pulwama and stopping of bilateral trade and talks post abrogation of Article 370. Peace with Pakistan has been elusive for various reasons and has been a huge obstacle for security and economic relations of South Asia. India Pakistan bilateral developments and relations. Let's have a look at 5 points under this. In 2019, Pulwama suicide bombing carried out by a Pakistani terrorist group Jaish-e-Mohammed, killing over 40 CRPF personnel, was the starting point of the steep slide in relations. Indian fighter jets targeted a JEM terrorist camp not in Pakistan occupied Kashmir but in Balakot in the Pakistani province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a typical knee-jerk reaction, Prime Minister Imran Khan downgraded diplomatic relations by expelling the Indian High Commissioner and suspending all trade between the two countries. The official trade between the two countries is small at $2.4 billion. Smuggling amount to another $5 billion takes place along the border. A substantial amount of trade also takes place through third countries like the United Arab Emirates and Singapore, amounting to around $5 to $10 billion. Importance of peace with Pakistan for transformation of South Asia. A fair peace between India and Pakistan is not just good for the two states but for all the nations constituting the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Reports such as World Bank publication titled A Glass Half Full and others from the Asian Development Bank and European Union conclude that there is explosive value to be derived from South Asian economic integration. An economically transformed and integrated South Asia region could advantageously link up with China's Belt and Road Initiative and even join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the world's largest trading bloc of 15 countries accounting for 30% of its GDP as much valued partner. Given its size and heft, only India can take the lead in transforming a grossly underperforming region like South Asia. Collectively, with a population of slightly over 1.9 billion, South Asia has a GDP of $12 trillion. Contrast this with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which has GDP of around $9 trillion. And a per capita income which at $14,000 is closing on in China, with member states like Vietnam starting to grow spectacularly, such as the tremendous economic growth that is possible with true regional integration. And with economic integration, hostilities will reduce and war becomes unthinkable. This economic integration is needed for normalization of ties for India and Pakistan. Now, given that two countries have agreed to maintain ceasefire, it is time for India to seize the moment and become more South Asia concerned and much less Pakistan obsessed. But for that to happen, India needs to view a peace with Pakistan as a bilateral matter to be arrived at leisurely, if at all, but as essential and urgent, all the while viewing it as a chance of a lifetime to dramatically transform South Asia for the better. Is no less. The next topic is government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. The question under this is examine the need and significance of protection of personal data of the people in India. The pandemic has forced more people to participate in the digital economy. More people have taken to digital channels to fulfill a variety of needs like purchasing groceries and accessing health services. Unfortunately, the number of personal data breaches from major digital service providers has increasingly worried in the same period. Now let's have a look at the body of this answer. Need for data protection of Indians. Frequent data breach of users is happening. The recent alleged data breach at MobiKwik could stand to be India's biggest breach with a data of 9.9 crore users at risk. No comprehensive law in place. The way different entities collect and process users' personal data in India is mainly governed by the Information Technology Act 2000 and various other sectoral regulations. However, this data protection regime falls short of providing effective protection to users and their personal data. Broad terms and conditions. Entities could override the protections in the regime by taking users' consent to processing personal data under broad terms and conditions. This is problematic given that users might not understand the terms and conditions of the implications of giving the consent. No data privacy. Further, the frameworks emphasize data security but do not place enough emphasis on data privacy. In essence, while entities must employ technical measures to protect personal data, they have weaker obligations to respect users' preferences and how personal data can be processed. As a result, entities could use the data for purposes different to those that the user consented to. Loopholes and exceptions. The data protection provisions under the IT Act also do not apply to government agencies. This creates a large vacuum for data protection when governments are collecting and processing large amounts of personal data. Finally, the regime seems to have become antiquated and inadequate in addressing risks emerging from new developments in data processing technology. Personal Data Protection Bill in India, the need for a more robust data protection legislation came to the fore in 2017 post the Supreme Court's landmark judgment in J.S. Kuru in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy, retired, versus Union of India, that established the right to privacy as a fundamental right. In the judgment, the court called for a data protection law that can effectively protect users' privacy over their personal data. The bill constitutes three personal information types: critical, sensitive, and general. The data principle, as per the bill, it is the individual whose data is being stored and processed. Exemptions: the government is qualified to order any data fiduciary to acquire personal and non-personal anonymized data for the sake of research and for national security and criminal investigations. Social media companies, which are deemed significant data fiduciaries based on factors such as volume and sensitivity of data as well as their turnover, should develop their own user verification mechanism. An independent regulator, data protection agency, will oversee assessments and audits and definition making. Each company will have a data protection officers who are licensed with the DPA for auditing, grievance redressal, recording maintenance, and more. The bill also grants individuals the right to data portability and the ability to access and transfer one's own data. The right to be forgotten, this right allows an individual to remove consent for data collection and disclosure. Significance of data protection: the rising importance of data has pushed over 80 countries to pass national laws protecting the collection and use of their citizens' data by companies and the government. The bill will have huge commercial and political consequences for India. In India, the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 is currently under consideration by a parliamentary committee. According to Ernst and Young, emerging technologies in India will create $1 trillion in economic value by 2025. Much of this value will be founded on the creation, use, and sale of data, and the bill will have immense implications as the firms scramble to meet new privacy regulations. More importantly, how users wish for the data to be handled will be accommodated, and companies will need to adhere to the provisions of the law. Conclusion: the time is right for India to have a robust data protection regime. A strong data protection legislation will also help to enforce data sovereignty. India must adopt stringent law in the same lines as GDPR, that is, General Data Protection Regime, enacted by the European Union. So India needs a data protection law, and right now it is under parliamentary committee consideration. So hopefully sooner or later we'll be having a data protection law which will help in protecting the data of the individuals of the country. Next topic is important aspects of governance, transparency and accountability, e-governance applications, models, successes, limitations and potential, citizens charters, transparency and accountability, and institutional and other measures. To what extent do you think that the citizens of a country should be actively involved in law and policy making? Discuss. Right? So, to what extent do we actually think that citizens are needed for policy analysis and policy making? A transparent consultation process must be initiated to design a law and public participation in law and policy making and to regulate lobbying and advocacy in an equitable manner. Right now, whenever there is a policy is being made, the government consults the industries but not the people. Even if it consults the people, it is put up on the website and hardly anybody can put forward their opinions. So mostly it is the lobbying group, that is the Adani, Ambani and those kind of industrialists, who actually talk to the government and get things done for their own benefit. So it is very important that citizens also involve in the policy making to ensure that their views are also put in place, are also considered while making a policy. For example, whenever a policy on education is made, teachers have to be consulted, students also have to be consulted to understand the nature of the education system in the country and how we can actually improvise it to our own benefit. And also the government can actually talk to the students who have gone abroad to study and how they have utilized the education system in other countries, and how can we implement that education system in India, and how can we reform our education system for the benefit of all so that it can help in reducing the brain drain in the country. Now let's have a look at the body. Citizen consultancy in India and gaps. The pre-legislative consultation policy was instituted in 2014, requiring that every ministry and department proactively publish every proposed draft legislation or subordinate legislation, its justification, essential elements, financial implications, and an estimated impact assessment on rights, lives, livelihoods, and environment. The policy also provides that all such information should be put in the public domain for a minimum period of 30 days, and the feedback received should also be published on the website of ministry or department. On both these counts, the trends of the past few years are alarming and indicate an exclusionary and arbitrary law and policy making process. As per an analysis between June 2014 and May 2019, a total of 186 bills were introduced, out of which 142 saw no prior consultations. One such bill, reorganizing the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, saw an unprecedented breakdown of all channels of consultation within and outside the parliament. Another one, redefining the relationship between the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi and elected Chief Minister of Delhi, saw no consultation whatsoever with either the people of Delhi or the elected legislature. In other words, the affected parties were denied the opportunity to participate in making the law. Even where consultation has been carried out, it has left much to be desired. Last year, amidst the pandemic, the government proposed drastic changes to the environment impact assessment procedures. Concerned citizens had to approach the courts to get the deadline for consultation extended and to get the government to make the notification available in all scheduled languages so that everyone could meaningfully participate in the consultation. Need for participation of citizens in governance and policy making, inequitable access to and exclusion from law and policy making processes is a relatively unexplored yet crucial social justice issue. It manifests in procedures which are designed to deny opportunity, exclude diverse voices, create constraints of technology, language, and time, as well as disable meaningful consultations, especially with those critical of a law or policy. An electoral mandate is not a carte blanche to do as the government wishes. It merely enables the government to present its proposals to people and seek their approval through representative bodies like the parliament and through public consultations, which, if done transparently, provides a level playing field for legitimate advocacy and lobby efforts. A collaborative approach to policy making upholds the dignity, agency, and capabilities of individuals. Denying citizen consultation also curtails the freedom of speech of such excluded groups to undertake legitimate advocacy on law and policy issues. In doing so, the government also abdicates its constitutional responsibility to minimize and eliminate inequalities in status and opportunity among individuals and groups of people when it comes to access to lawmaking. In a country governed by rule of law and a liberal constitution providing for representation of marginalized sections in lawmaking positions, it is not difficult to argue that closed and exclusive access to lawmaking processes is antithetical to justice, social, economic, and political that the constitution guarantees to everyone. By adopting arbitrary and discretionary processes and not clearly identifying and including all stakeholders in the policy making process, the government denies equality before law to those excluded. Hence, citizen participation alone asserts that the government has a mandate and consent to make the said policy. General Studies 3, topic conservation, environment, pollution, and degradation, environmental impact assessment. Let's have a look at the question under this. What are the main causes of man wildlife conflict? How can man prevent animal conflict? Discuss some of the recent policies of the government in this direction. We have seen that humans come in contact with animals, and it's most probably animals lose their life or humans also lose their lives. Where you can see up in places like Sakleshpur and those areas where elephants rampage into the human habitation and they threaten their own lives. So this kind of man-animal conflict has to be, taken into consideration and look at the main causes of man-wildlife conflict and how can we resolve or prevent this animal conflict. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. According to data from the Union Environment Ministry, more than 1,608 humans were killed in human wildlife conflict cases involving tigers, leopards, bears, and elephants between 2013 and 2017. A deadly conflict is underway between India's growing masses and its wildlife, confined to ever shrinking forests and grasslands, with data showing that about one person has been killed every day for the past 3 years by roaming tigers or rampaging elephants. Reasons for rise in man animal conflicts: unbridled development. The existing space for tigers, elephants, and other big wild animals are shrinking due to encroachment of wildlife habitats. Unsustainable land use is the biggest problem in this regard. Animals are increasingly finding their usual corridors and pathways blocked by roads, rail tracks, and industries. The Ken Betwa River linking project will submerge 100 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve. Urbanization and growth agendas alter landscape dynamics, which has a cascading effect on the ecological dynamics of wildlife. Example, in the area of Gwal Pahari on the Gurugram Faridabad road, for example, the district town and country planning department has issued change of land use permissions. Recent relaxations in norms to allow for widening of a highway and railway networks near these protected areas are the new threats. Primary reason for the increasing human-animal conflicts is the presence of large number of animals and birds outside the notified protected areas. Wildlife experts estimate that 29% of the tigers in India are outside the protected areas. Poor enforcement of laws, no buffer zone is maintained between critical wildlife habitats and human settlements. Climate change and biodiversity: with the food chain undergoing rapid changes and pool of species declining, the forage is decreasing for wild animals. Hence, they come in search of livestock in fringe areas of human settlements. Less protected area: only 5% of India's geographical area in the protected area category. The space is not enough to have a full fledged habitat for wild animals. A territorial animal like a male tiger needs an area of 60 to 100 square kilometers, but the area allocated to an entire tiger reserve, like the Bor Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra, is around 140 square kilometers. The territorial animals do not have enough space within reserves, and their prey does not have enough fodder to thrive on. Well, now let's have a look at the government initiatives to reduce man-animal conflict. A network of protected areas, namely national parks, sanctuaries, conservation areas, and community reserving covering important wildlife habitat, have been created all over the country under the provisions of Wildlife Protection Act 1972 to conserve wild animals and their habitat. Wildlife corridors have been developed in many parts of the country. For example, in 2017, to protect elephant habitats, the Odisha government had identified 14 corridors. Tiger corridor around Tadoba and the Hari Tiger reserves are built. Plan B, Indian Railways launched Plan B to prevent elephants getting hurt on railway tracks, so thereby reducing the you know death toll. Nearly 50 buzzing amplifiers have been deployed as part of Plan B at a dozen elephant corridors in the vast forests of Assam, home to nearly 6,000 elephants, 20% of the country's total. State governments assistance to the state government for construction of boundary walls and solar fences around the sensitive areas to prevent the wild animal conflict, supplementing the state government resources for payment of ex gratia to the people for injuries and loss of life in case of wild animal attacks, encouraging state government for creation of a network of protected areas and wildlife corridors for conservation of wildlife. So these are some of the things. Other things are provisions under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 empower concerned authorities take necessary steps to handle problematic wild animals. Standard operating procedures for the management of major problematic animals like tiger, elephant, leopard, rhino are being used by the state governments. Controlling population in Jan 2018, the ministry has approved immune contraception method to address man-animal conflicts. The immunocontraception is non-hormonal form of contraception to causes production of antibodies, which in turn prevents conception in animals. Ministry sanctioned over 10 crore for immunology contraception of wild birds, rhesus monkeys, and elephants. Way forward, community participation. Local volunteers should be trained to handle with human wildlife conflicts and organize locals for immediate initial steps till the wildlife rescue team arrives. Rescue teams, wildlife rescue teams equipped with adequate personal equipment and communication systems should be present in potential areas of human animal conflict. Awareness campaign hunting of prey animals such as deer and pig needs to stop as they form the base for growth of tiger and other carnivore populations. Identifying regular movements, corridors of large wildlife and adequate publicity awareness to avoid disturbances. Compilation of data on conflicts, reasons for such conflicts, best practices of response, identify hotspots of conflict and keep extra vigil in such areas. Insurance program for damage due to wildlife. Crop insurance should be provided in the event of destruction by wild animals. Livestock insurance and its scope must be explored. Help locals in constructing barriers and develop scaring away methods. Human life is vital and so is thriving wildlife that sustains the ecosystem. Harmony between humans and wildlife can ensure protection of both conservation and development must go hand in hand to combat man-animal conflict, which in turn will lead to sustainable development. The next topic is issues relating to development and management of social sector, services relating to health, education, human resources, conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, environmental impact assessment. The question under this is to prevent the next pandemic, it is essential for us to understand zoonotic diseases and to invest in an in-depth understanding of environmental linkages with zoonotic diseases. COVID 19 has caused profound damage to human health, societies, and economies in every corner of the world. This illness is zoonotic, a type of disease that transmits between animals and humans. It may be the worst, but it is not the first. We already know that 60% of known infectious diseases in humans and 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. Ebola, SARS, the Zika virus, bird flu all came to people by way of animals. Understanding zoonotic diseases and environmental linkages is very important because the relationship between the environment, biodiversity, human society, and the human disease is complex. While wildlife may be a source of human disease, domesticated animal sources may act as amplifiers of pathogens emerging from the wild. Moreover, most emerging infectious diseases, whether in wildlife, domestic animals, plants, or people, are driven by human activities such as agricultural intensification, wildlife use and misuse, the human induced landscape changes, interacting in unpredictable ways that can have negative outcomes. Against this backdrop, it is important to recognize that disease emergence is not only about the relationship between domestic animals or wildlife and people, but also about the complexity of the system as a whole and the interactions between the biotic and symbiotic components. Biodiversity and the complexity of our landscapes and seascapes is integral to social and ecological resilience. Around 80% of pathogens infecting animals are multi-host, which meaning that they move among different animal hosts, including occasionally humans. Domestic animals and peridomestic wildlife also act as bridges for the emergence of human diseases. This can occur in an evolutionary sense, or the animal could serve as a physical transmitter. Some of these viruses generated in bio-insecure industrial and intensive agricultural systems result in zoonotic forms of the virus. An example is the highly pathogenic avian influenza, an important economic disease of domestic poultry that evolves from low pathogenic viruses that circulate commensally in the environment in wild bird populations. Factors driving zoonotic diseases and pandemic: increasing demand for animal protein. High income countries have experienced little change in consumption of animal source foods during the last 4 decades. In contrast, Southeast Asia has seen a rapid increase. Unsustainable agricultural intensification. As a result, domestic animals are being kept in close proximity to each other and often in less than ideal conditions. Such genetically homogeneous host populations are more vulnerable to infection than genetically diverse populations, because the latter are more likely to include some individuals that better resist disease. Increased use and exploitation of wildlife: harvesting wild animals, wild meat, sometimes called bush meat, as a source of protein, micronutrients, and money for the poor. Hunting, etc., are part of the reason. Unsustainable utilization of natural resources, accelerated by urbanization, land use change, and extractive industries. Rapid urbanization, especially when unplanned and with poor infrastructure, creates novel and diverse contracts among the wildlife, livestock, people. Travel and transportation: diseases can now move around the world in periods shorter than their incubation periods to a pathogen and first clinical sign of illness. Way forward: build robust and well governed public and animal health systems compliant with the WHO international health regulations. The amendment entered into force in July 2016 and OIE international standards through the pursuit of long term interventions. Prevent regional and international crises by controlling disease outbreaks through improved national and international emergency response capabilities. Promote wide ranging collaboration across sectors and disciplines. Develop rational and targeted disease control programs through the conduct of strategic research. Better address concerns of the poor by shifting the focus from developed to developing economies, from potential to actual disease problems, and through a focus on the drivers of a broader range of locally important diseases. In the case of emerging diseases, upfront investments in surveillance and in coordinated human, animal, and environmental health services are needed to ensure that emergent events do not turn into full scale epidemics or pandemics. In economic terms, the World Bank estimated 8 years ago that an annual investment of $3.4 billion in animal health systems worldwide would avert losses incurred through delayed or inadequate responses to zoonosis. Losses estimated at almost double the preventive investment. The loss of human life and economic and social cost of the COVID-19 crisis clearly indicate the value and the necessity of increased investment in surveillance, prevention measures, and coordinated cross-sectoral early response to ensure we do everything possible to prevent this from happening again. Conclusion: controlling and preventing zoonotic outbreaks requires coordinated interdisciplinary responses across human, animal, and environmental health. Our responses to both controlling the ongoing COVID 19 pandemic and to reducing the risk of future zoonotic diseases outbreaks must address a range of areas, starting from environmental protection and incorporating One Health policy. Let's go on to the next topic, that is General Studies 4. The topic here is on the case study. Miss A had a friend relation with Mr. B. Both are in their teenage, and they developed a bond in trust and have had consensual sex. But one day, the boy sent their private images to her friends. Since then, to his friends, then the girl feels shattered and depressed. She feels suddenly loss of reputation and betrayal. To her shock, the boy denied any involvement. The girl doesn't want a police case, rather, she wants acknowledgement of wrongdoing and admission of guilt by the boy. There are many similar incidents happening in different parts of the country. The increment in such incidents is also due to social media and befriending through this platform and deserting later. In this case, suppose the parents of the girl approach a police station for intervention without FIR and you are in charge of the station, then discuss your courses of action. What legal, social, and psychological challenges will you be facing? Discuss. Also suggest way forward. Unfortunately, sexual abuse of children has only recently been publicly acknowledged as a problem in India, which is why POXO has been a welcome development in India. Despite being well intentioned and detailed, POXO has one lacuna. It does not differentiate between sexual acts between consensual minors. and sexual acts between minors and adults. Stakeholders in the case: the two teenagers involved in the case, parents of the two children, police handling the conciliation. Ethical issues involve violation of trust, issue of Indian law and consensual sex of minors, psychological impact on the victim, issue of consent in sharing private images, privacy violation, impact of social media on the young minds. Challenges faced in the case: as police in charge, we must handle the situation with adequate sensitivity. Here, the girl and boy have been in consensual relation. However, sharing of the private images violated the privacy of the girl, who is psychologically affected as her reputation was impacted. Moreover, under Indian law, divorce with minor is considered sexual abuse and a minor's consent is not admissible. Both being minors, there will be illegal challenges if an investigation is to be made. There will be social challenges and pressures to take action against the boy, example as in the case of boys locker room episode. But one must view this from the minor's perspective and their future. Moreover, psychologically, police may be ill-equipped or ill-trained to handle such cases, which requires the help of psychologists and guidance counselors. Courses of action: since the girl does not want to file an FIR, police must ensure that both the families are consulted well. The police must verify whether the boy indeed shared the images himself, and if not, how it was shared online. In case of the girl, she must be given assurance that such incidents in the long run should not affect her bright future. She must overcome the trauma and look forward towards her career and studies and become a successful person. Her parents must be told not to reprimand the girl. Awareness training must be given, and such courses must be given to adolescents to in high school. The avenues for therapy must be explored in her case, and requisite treatment and emotional support must be given from the family. In the case of the boy, he must be made aware of his mistake in violating the privacy and trust of other person. He must be educated on respecting and instilled with right values on gender justice and equality. We need to understand where this behavior is coming from. Is this coming from a home where some trauma that this child has gone through themselves? Is this coming from some sexual abuse, or is it coming from some kind of violence the child is exposed to in their house? It could be a combination of a lot of things. Right counseling, even in this case, is needed from the experts in the area of gender, and to stop objectifying women must be clearly explained. Make an attempt to override sexist influences, telling them treat girls with respect, act honorably towards them. It would bode well to remind parents of their responsibility in teaching their children about the wrong stereotypes. As parents, their role in inculcating proper understanding of gender equality becomes crucial. Pause the next time one is inclined towards sharing a sexist joke in gathering. Pause before one laughs at such jokes, because it is just a joke. Remember, for a child, it is far more than a joke and is insisted an example of how to treat other gender. When, as parents, you pull up someone over a gender biased statement or rebuke inferior treatment of women in any manner, you teach your kid to stand up for what is right and not cave under peer pressure. Parents and also need to monitor the other influences and mentors of their children, what they propagate about respecting about the other genders equally. So education, curriculum, and the process are abysmal in our country, to say the least, and within that, one must apprise of what amounts to respectful behavior and reinforce the same. The whole process is hindered by the so called conservative values, which have resulted in a very reluctant and inadequate attempt at sex education. Education policy must include this and disseminate it widely. Thank you for being part of this video. I hope you like this initiative. Please press the like button and also subscribe to my channel. And I'll be coming up with the 15th of April secure synopsis tomorrow. Thank you so much. Have a good day.